to move towards the front so that you can see the slide presentation. Okay, we have, some of the slides are a little busy.
I got another one.
Okay. Hello. There we go. So I've started the last couple of sessions with saying that I'm a school crossing guard, and I cross the little kids, and they are full of it for Halloween. So here's their first joke. What animal should not be in a classroom? A cheetah. And what do you get when you cross a caterpillar with a porcupine? A slow poke. That's it for my stand-up routine. Hello, and thank you for coming. My name is Amy Vocal, and I am a member of the Parish Pastoral Council. We also have with us Shirley Cirillo, who's a lay trustee and on council, and Mario Montalvo, there he is over there, who is also on Parish Council, Rick McGrath from our Finance Committee, and am I missing anyone? Oh, and of course we have Father John. So we're going to, that was for you, a smattering of applause.
No, I think it was for you. They love those jokes.
Could we have the next slide, please? Yes, it worked. There are 14 buildings on our 3 campuses, and in order to get a handle on all of these properties, a facilities task force was created, and they reviewed every building top to bottom. Next slide, please. Here's a listing of the buildings by campus and their current status, if they're rented, etc. We will put the slide up again at the end. It seems to be really helpful to folks during our question and answer period. Next slide, please. We're going to be throwing a lot of numbers at you, and it's important to note that the review that the Facilities Task Force did was in 2021, and it does not take into account supply chain issues and costs and current inflation rates and continued issues with our buildings. I will try to be as clear as possible with the numbers, but I do understand it's a lot. So if you think of questions, make a note of them in your head. We will have plenty of time for questions and answers. Next slide, please. So for the Blessed Sacrament campus, these are the numbers, the capital expense numbers done by the Facilities Task Force, and they were generated from the analysis done by our HVAC vendor, electrical engineer, roofing vendor, and stained glass. So this was not something that necessarily the task force itself came up with. We had experts who did that. Can you hear me okay? What does what mean? So in the first 0 to 5 years, this is the range of capital expenses or money that will be needed. These are not cumulative numbers. In 5 to 10 years, those are the numbers that are going to be needed, and then 10 plus years. Okay? Next slide, please. We do provide a better breakdown of this. And again, this is for the Blessed Sacrament campus. And where there was a numeric range, I took the average to come up with these numbers. So you can see the church needs nearly $500,000 in stained glass repair and maintenance. The church and the school need new roofs. The rectory/office is configured in a way that really limits its usefulness and inhibits the effective use of space. The convent has a number of issues. It was 2 wooden buildings that were joined together by putting a brick skin over them and an addition on the back. That makes it largely dysfunctional at this point and for the long term. Next slide, please. These are the capital expenses for St. Boniface. Again, the numbers come in from our experts. So the 0 to 5 years, what will be needed, 5 to 10, and then 10 plus years. And once again, these are not cumulative numbers. They are individual. Next slide. Here's more detailed information again, and the church will need significant air conditioning and temperature control work. The school needs work on the roof and also work on its boiler, as does the rectory. Next slide. And here are the capital expenses for St. Mary's. If you go to the next slide. Stained glass work is needed along with roofing for the church and the rectory. Because electrical work was done previously, we don't have any electrical issues at this time. Next slide. Here's a recap by campus. As you can see, the next 5 years, we need over $1 million to cover our capital expenses. And while the next 5 to 10 years aren't as high, the costs skyrocket again when we get to 10 plus years. Next slide, please. Your parish pastoral council has worked with 3 different organizations to consider alternative uses for our buildings. Tours of the buildings were conducted on the Blessed Sacrament and St. Boniface campuses, focusing particularly on the school buildings. St. Mary's was not toured since the 2 buildings it has, the church and the priest residence, are not as readily available or as attractive for repurposing. Next slide, please. The most common recommendations are housing, subsidized housing, senior living housing, housing for people with disabilities. The Nativity School on the St. Boniface campus was interested in a right of first refusal if the school were ever put on the market. That would need to be considered should we move in that direction. Next, please. I have more numbers, but these should be a bit easier to follow. Next, please. As you can see, attendance has been steadily declining. COVID accelerated it, but it was already happening. The numbers have dropped dramatically from 2016 to today. Next slide, please. The same is true for our collections. We have occasional blips of exceeding the budget, but overall they've been decreasing steadily over the years. And keep in mind also that having the 4:30 Mass for 6 months at St. Boniface and 6 months at St. Mary's also impacts these numbers. Next slide, please. We have a lot of challenges ahead of us. There is a lot to be done to keep our buildings safe and functioning. And as we have seen, millions of dollars will be required. We need to ask ourselves, how do we do this? How do we move forward? Next slide, please. We need your help. There are some great ideas out there, and please do not be shy about sharing them. It could be the next good thing, the next great thing. Your parish pastoral council wants to hear your thoughts, your concerns, and your ideas. We certainly don't have all the answers, so we want to hear from you. We want to listen and have you help us figure things out the best we can. The Parish Pastoral Council now has an email address, sercc.parishcouncil@dor.org. That will be published in the bulletin going forward. So you're welcome to communicate that way. You can catch us after Mass, but I will tell you right now, if you catch me after Mass, I'm going to say to you, would you please write that down, because I'm not going to remember from here to my house. So happy to listen, but we really need to have something written in order to get it right. Next slide, please. We will be having more information sharing opportunities as we continue the review of our facilities, continuing to review our options and ideas. We'll have some more town hall style presentations and small group gatherings to brainstorm and consider options. Next slide, please. I will ask my lovely assistants to distribute a frequently asked questions document that was put together. But if you remember nothing else, this is our summary right here. Our current model is not sustainable. We have 14 buildings with sizable carrying costs facing significant capital expenditures. And I'd never heard the term carrying costs until about a year or two ago, but I figured out that that's what we pay in our houses. It's our heating, it's our insurance, and all that. It's the cost of being a homeowner or having buildings like this. And again, the Parish Pastoral Council, in the spirit of collaboration and transparency, has shared what we've learned so far. And we are asking for your constructive engagement to help us formulate a plan. Next slide. Actually, Rick, could you go back to slide 3? Sorry. I think.
That's what I thought.
There we go. Yeah, the up arrow. Number 8. There we go. Slide number 3, the one that lists all the buildings and their uses. So let's open it up for questions. I do have a wandering microphone, so just give me a moment to get to you. You're fine.
Hi.
Hello, Pat. Hold it right up.
First of all, I want to say that the work that the council has done is extraordinary, and to be able to reduce it to a presentation like this is amazing. Amy put hours in, I know, as well as other people have, and Father John's engagement in it. I was involved early on, and he's really a blessing to all of us. He is in this full force and very helpful. My only question has to do with attendance. Does it include remote attendance?
No.
So,
Does it include remote attendance?
Pat Marks was asking about the attendance figure. Does it include people who watch the live stream? And no, it doesn't. That's just physical attendance in.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? Jenny.
If, and this is an if, we decide to sell the school at Blessed Sacrament, would we be responsible to make it handicap accessible, or would they be?
More than likely they would. Mm-hmm. So the developers we talked to, Pastone, Conifer, they've developed similar buildings, and see if they do it in terms of subsidized housing or for people with disabilities. Oftentimes there's state money, so they leverage that to put an elevator in. They've done it before. They assured us that they can address that. We wanted to talk to them because we know our buildings are full of asbestos and lead and lots of challenges, access, things like that. To them, that presented no problems. They've tackled all those before. They felt comfortable being able to pursue. If we were to say, would you like to develop this building? In fact, I think Amy's getting an email once a month from Stone saying, have you made a decision?
What are you doing?
Conifer, on the other hand, said, we've got enough projects in the pipeline. If you decided to move forward, it'd probably 4 or 5 years down the line before we got to your project.
Mm-hmm. I'm in the back now, so I can get to people quickly. Other questions? Yes. Hold that right up to your mouth.
Right up?
Yep.
Okay. So my question is, and I know this wasn't, I'll just say it. I feel kind of funny asking this question, but how about the churches themselves? Do they have any market value, and can they be repurposed?
Okay.
It seems like something we wouldn't want to do, but I'm just curious about that.
So parish council was of a mind that we shouldn't start there. That would be hard for people to hear. We're marketing your church. I think that would get in the way of looking at the whole picture and considering the whole thing. So no, we didn't do that. That doesn't mean that that might be a possibility. I think it's become more and more of a difficult challenge within the structure of the Catholic Church, as in the Northeast where they've consolidated, a lot of people have objected and gone to the Vatican and made appeals, so it's much more difficult to close and sell a church. Not hard to close the church, but to close and then sell it is a little more difficult.
And when we did the tours, only if we had to walk through the church to get to another spot. The churches were not included in the tours that we did with Conifer, Pathstone, and Mary Cariola. We did not, when we met with the consultants to do tours, we did not tour the churches.
So on the Q&A where it says, could we reimagine the parish based on successful models, could you go into a little bit more detail about what they did in Timonium, Maryland and in Halifax, Nova Scotia?
Sure. So these are two models that are getting a lot of popular play, in the Catholic Church as a whole. So Timonium was first, and kind of a sleepy suburban parish facing all the challenges that a lot of parishes do, aging populations and all that sort of stuff. The pastor and the pastoral associate went and toured megachurches and looked at what they did to attract everybody, get everybody to come. And they basically took that model and made it a Catholic, applied it to a Catholic context. And that's what they're doing. They literally got rid of all of their ministries and everything and created a church based on that sort of a model. And it's been very successful. Hordes of people coming in. When they have, I think, Christmas and Easter, they don't actually do it in their church. They go and rent a huge facility to get everybody in. So that's one model. The other model is up in Halifax, Nova Scotia. So I should say the one in Timonium, Maryland, the pastor and pastoral associate wrote a book. It's called Rebuilt. And they wrote one book, and now they've got a whole thing going on. The one up in Halifax, there were 3 churches. They closed all 3 and built a new church. And then they brought in a new pastor. And he came with, let's look at what we're doing. We got to do this differently. So he created a model, and it was an opportunity because it was sort of a new church, and here's an opportunity to do something. That's called divine renovation. And again, very successful. They've, I think, had subsequently 1 or 2 successive pastors, and they've been able to keep it going. So it's not just the personalities. The one in Timonium, Maryland, I think to a certain extent it is a personality-driven model. A certain style of priest and pastoral associate that makes that go. But the one up in Halifax looks like it's replicable. It's not reliant on a personality. But I think both of them have ideas about what we could do in terms of growing the church. To look at and things to grow and learn from.
Tom, you had a question?
Well, as the former city assessor, I was probably at least oversaw those who put the values on all these buildings inside the city, but I wouldn't quite trust those values, and I was going to ask if you've started to consider having an appraisal done of all the facilities and all the campuses, because market value and assessed value often do differ. You could certainly challenge that, but a house of worship, is almost valueless until it goes on the market. And all I remember is Holy Redeemer, probably 40 years ago, selling on Hudson for like $200,000. It probably had been assessed at $1.2 million at one point, but and then I said to Rick McGrath maybe to bring in developers, and you have a couple excellent developers or property owners right in the Blessed Sacrament Parish, Andy Galena and George Novak, George and Margot, that are used to some of this. Maybe you've already done some of this, but to get a sense of, not for us to manage and do, but what's the market out there for. And Father John, I want to say that we're in 3 excellent popular neighborhoods of the city of Rochester. You couldn't have better. South Wedge, downtown with all the development just being the center of the city, and of course the Monroe Park Ave area. So I think I only see good things happening with all this real estate, really.
That is one of the recommendations from the consultants that we worked with, is that we start getting, find a reputable realtor and start getting some assessments and market values. We're not quite there yet. We're still assessing and looking around. That would definitely be part of the plan. I saw her hand. Oh, Bill. Hold it right up.
As I'm looking at this, St. Mary's has a very small footprint. We have 2 buildings. The other 2 churches have quite a large campus. And that's probably one of the big problems right there, okay, with aging buildings. A thought I had would be Blessed Sacrament if they sold off the school, rectory, parish office, and convent, and they do own the house on Oxford Street, right? They own it.
Right, 514 Oxford.
Okay, and make that house on Oxford Street the parish office, and then they'd have 2 buildings, and it would be far less expense to keep up than at that point. You know what I mean? Or the same with St. Boniface, because the more buildings you have, the more expenses you have, you know?
Yep.
And
So here's the trick with selling buildings in the city: parking. So both of those campuses have their own parking lots, but they're not significant enough where you could sell off enough parking necessarily to make it attractive for a developer. So that's why, in some ways, looking at the schools for Section 8 or persons with disabilities, elderly who don't drive, things like that, it might work in that sense. So, I mean, to a certain extent, just selling the building with no parking becomes a challenge. I know from my time at Blessed Sacrament, they wanted to expand their parking lot. So they bought all the houses around, and they went to the city and said, "We're going to create this huge parking lot." And the city said, "No, you're not." So they had to put in 2 big pocket parks at either end of the parking lot. So all this parking they thought they were going to get by buying these buildings didn't happen, because they ended up with these 2 big pocket parks because the city didn't want, just a huge parking lot. Cathedral, yep.
Oh,
Yeah.
said
I'm sorry. The cathedral. Yeah. So, that's always sort of a tricky proposition in terms of developing city property, is that you have to give parking with the building, kind of thing. And that's not something we have a lot of. That doesn't mean you can't work it out in terms of, what choices you make, but I think you have to be kind of strategic in terms of considering, if you're going to sell it, how much of your parking lot you're going to give with it, or you're going to have to give with it to make it sellable. And that's not something we have a lot of. But yeah, no, I mean, that's certainly, some of the less of the challenges here at St. Mary's is you only have 2 buildings. The other have 6.
You're obviously coming up with
Hold it right up to you.
You're obviously coming up with a major strategic decision, and I heard the word used, consultant. Unless it's proprietary information, I would hope the consultant is someone that is absolutely removed from any internal position in the...
Yeah, they're outside organizations:
Is it-
Pathstone, Conifer,
Oh, those
and Mary
are the 3.
Cariola.
Okay.
Yes, those are the 3 that
Those are 3. However, I would argue that each one of them have a certain
yeah.
interest.
Sure.
You're not employing anyone who is purely a strategic business consultant to look over your shoulder as a pure business decision.
Not at this point.
Okay, right.
So, no, I mean, if somebody has a person that's that sort of a business consultant and strategic person who would be willing to work with us, and you want to recommend somebody, happy to hear any sort of names. I mean, this is part of the reason why we're coming to you now in this process, right? Is to get these ideas, get these suggestions about how to do this in a better way. We could have, quietly gone off and figured this all out by ourselves, and then come to you and said, here's the plan, and then invariably you would have all these things. Did you do this? Did you think about that? Did you consider this option? Did you consider that option? So that's why we're trying to come to you now in the process and sort of say, if you've got an idea, if you've got a suggestion, if you've got, a way we could think differently about this, please come forward with those ideas now, so that we can consider it, look at it, figure out, can we incorporate that? Does that bias something? So when the folks at St. Boniface saw that over here, at the cell phone tower in the church steeple, they said, well, has anyone approached them to see if they want to put one in our church? And I said, no, but if you want to do a little, preliminary exploring to find out whether that might be an option, make some phone calls, and if you, give us the name of the person we got to talk to, happy to explore that. But, I don't have the time to chase all of those options. So, some of it is, that's why we're coming here, is to sort of say, hey, if you know of ideas, or if you know people we could talk to, that's why we ended up talking to Pastone and Conifer, is that somebody, had action and put us in contact with them as just a way to start the process.
And that was all voluntary, the tours. So.
Yeah, we haven't paid them anything. We didn't, sign any contracts with them or anything. It was just get some information.
Yes, so my question is, has any thought been given to repurposing the schools for Catholic school purposes? And particularly in light of the fact that we're seeing, at least nationally, increased enrollment again in Catholic schools. So has there been any discussion on that?
Yeah, so currently the school at St. Boniface is a Catholic school. Nativity is a Catholic school.
Right.
We haven't, there hasn't been a lot of interest in terms of people starting Catholic schools. I think some of what we saw an uptick during COVID because Catholic schools tended to stay open, and so people were like, I want my kid to go because I've got to go to work, and I'd rather have them in school than not.
They were smaller classes.
Yeah, so, yeah, but I also know that in the diocese, they've continued to close Catholic schools. So, like down in Corning, Father Jones had to close his school. I think in Auburn, they ended up closing the school there. It's, some of it's economics too, right? The community just doesn't have the wealth to sustain private education. Now, whether that change with, the composition of the Supreme Court, whether they're going to say that, public school money can go with a student to private school, including religious school, don't know. Yep.
And I think also that we can't assume the risk of waiting, because the more time that goes by, the greater opportunity that we start to incur these massive capital costs on the structures. I mean, St. Mary's is lucky in that we shed our structures years ago. But what we have, we're getting rental income on the other two parishes for the buildings that are no longer being used for their intended purpose. But there's a time bomb, and it's ticking. And you're looking at $3 million in total for all three parishes coming down the road. So probably the economic issue to me is quite clear. The most difficult issue is the emotional one, in coming to terms that we have to shed some of what was our history and the school I went to, or where the sisters lived, or the priests lived. But we can't afford to continue on the path that we're on. I think that's what the good news coming from this, if it's good news, but the news coming from this presentation. And personally, I'm very grateful to Amy and the parish council, and especially Father John, for all, and it's been a substantial amount of work that's gone into bringing this presentation today to us.
Right.
And
So-
also,
So just to be clear, too, the numbers are up there for 4 areas: HVAC, roofing, electrical, and stained glass. Anything beyond that is more money. There's no plumbing, there's no architecture, there's no, let's put in a new carpet, let's put in new windows. So the hard numbers that we could get are a handle on. And, thanks to a connection that Rick has with a gentleman at Al Siegelson, who takes care of all of their facilities and maintenance, he's helped us come up with some numbers for stuff beyond the numbers we had. But, even there, it's not necessarily everything. And it's really about those numbers maintain the buildings we have the way they are. Right? No renovation, no reconfiguring, no, thinking differently about the structure to make it work. Some of it is, the rectory next door, was for a day when, there's 3 or 4 priests over there that served the parish. One parish. Yeah, and I guess the point is that a lot of these buildings were built for a different era. The same thing with the rectory over at Blessed Sacrament, where the offices are now. A ton of rooms, but not usable. There's sort of a dining room and another room that we can kind of fit 10, 12 people around a table, but beyond that, the spaces aren't really suited for necessarily our needs. So some of it is valuing what we have, but is there a way we can, either reconfigure what we have to make it work for where we are and how to build for the future, or is it time to sort of let that go because it's the cost to make reconfigurations is really prohibitive. But that's part of why we're doing what we're doing. So, this is all about facilities. We're also looking at ministries, right? So we did an analysis of ministries right before COVID happened or right as we were going into COVID. We've got to update that. Some of the other questions that we've realized is asking each ministry what you need in terms of facilities, right? So some of our groups, give them a meeting room and they're happy. But, if you think of something like the supper program, you need a, commercial kitchen and a dining room. If you think about the men's club in terms of how it's functioned, right? They have a bar, they have bowling alleys, room for pool tables, that. So each one is different, to do something like the next to new sale, right? You need a large space to have that happen. So, some of it is, yes, we have these facilities, but that can't drive sort of the process we're in, right? We need to think about our ministries and our mission and how do we sort of right-size our facilities in terms of what we need to do in terms of the mission that we have as a church.
right, as Father said, the work that we've done on looking with the consultants and stuff, we've gone in with our mission in the forefront. So we always come back to the mission of our Catholic community in looking at these. And you had a question. You got to hold it right up.
Just giving attention to parking. I think at one time we were asked to be careful in terms of parking over at St. Boniface because the neighbors had complained about our taking, parking spaces that were needed for them. So I think that's something we have to look at as well. Because when we talk about persons with disabilities and, having to walk, further from, the church, that is, important, as well.
Yep.
So,
That's part of what we need to consider, right, is that do the facilities work for the population we're trying to serve, and for everyone, that we're hoping to serve.
Other questions?
Speaking of looking at special needs, some of the parishes throughout the diocese cater to either the deaf community, the Vietnamese community, maybe the inner city community. Is there any part of the diocese that you guys have looked at that you could imagine that we work, say, with, I hate to even say it, but like St. Monica's, or is there partnering that we could do to keep one of the buildings opened and share one of the ministries? I don't even know if that's economically attractive in any way, shape, or form, or even the church for people with disabilities. That sounds awful, but I'm just sitting here thinking, what do we have? We are in the city, we are on bus lines. Most churches are not on bus lines. And I know you guys have been thinking about where we are and the beauty, and get the city involved. I mean, the city needs us. Is that a ploy for us at all? Just
Yeah, I think that's part of, sort of looking at who we're serving, right? So part of looking at what ministries, the whole ministries question is, what ministries exist now, what ministries that don't exist now that we need, and what ministries might we need in the future, or that we aren't sort of handling that we do need to address. So that has to be all part of the mix, right? And I think some of it is, I know something about the Vietnamese community because I saw them, and what happened was they were stationed in various city parishes, and they would get going and get established, and then they would close that church. So then the community said, wait a minute, we're done with the city because you keep closing these, send us out to the suburbs. So then they went out to St. Helens, and that's been closed now. But, so yes, I think it's sort of thinking about who we're really called to serve in terms of who is within the boundaries of our parish here, and how do we reach out to them. Maybe they aren't here right now, but we have a responsibility to serve them, right? And so, in terms of our planning, how are we thinking about, we're called as a city parish to serve the people in the city. Are we structuring ourselves in a way that does that?
Other comments, questions? Don't be shy. I know most of you, you're not shy. There we go. You're in jail.
I always talk in quips, so I have two quips that I think apply. One is I was walking around my neighborhood and was talking to a neighbor, and he said, we were talking about what did you do, and he consulted for some other churches, and he said his churches were driving him crazy because wherever they were, they wanted to build bigger churches. And the quip that just came out of somewhere was, Jesus was a carpenter, he knew how to build buildings, but he preached from a boat and he preached from up on the rock, because what he had to say was what's important, and not just the buildings. I mean, I've been here for 39 years, I have a lot of attachment, but either the building owns us or we own the building. And I think we have to be willing to let go. And that's hard, but I think it's just important. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, on that note, so my first assignment was at Sacred Heart Cathedral, and it was paired with Holy Rosary and Much Precious Blood. And after being there 2 years, they realized, or they came to the conclusion that they needed to consolidate, and they rapidly decided that they needed to close 2 of the churches. I think it was pretty obvious to everyone which of the 3 was going to stay open, considering they just pumped $10 million into the cathedral. But it was a heart-wrenching thing for a lot of folks, because buildings are also full of memories for folks and significant moments in their lives. And so, yes, it becomes very difficult to let go. But yes, ultimately, the church isn't about sustaining buildings. It's about being church as a community of people called to do what Jesus asks us to do.
Other questions?
And I forget if it was also Metrano, but when we go Central Church, and one Christmas here probably in the early 90s, Father Jim got up and said, where are we going to go next year? The War Memorial? Because people were practically clinging to the balconies. And this is one of 2 Christmas Eve services on that day before the 10 o'clock service in the evening. And all the churches were probably filling every Mass to capacity. And I've always had that kind of a dream that, to have a place where everyone has a seat, so you're not fighting for a seat on Easter Sunday. And I wouldn't mind if the War Memorial was converted, at least if not sometime during the year, but almost weekly, to bring us together, literally. We Catholics have been so used to parishes that many sects have one main church, Asbury or Incarnate Word, or St. Paul's Episcopal often is the one main church for them, and we've had all these wonderful parishes all for the last century and more, and now I think that should change. I would find that exciting, particularly if you knew buses would bring you into the crowd, or if the Pope came to the city, he wouldn't come to every little church. He would go to the War Memorial probably, or the Frontier Field, and maybe that's our dream, to stop with even a big paradigm shift would be stop with the parishes and go Central Church type of deal someday.
Mega church. Mega church.
Even in that model nativity that they've gone to mega, for them it's all about small groups. So even within the mega, they create small communities around different aspects that draw people in to encounter one another, on a small scale where they really get to know one another. It's not just everybody come and worship in this big gymnasium type thing and send them on their way. So there is that sort of struggle.
Mm-hmm. What else? Okay, hold on. Let me get to you.
Or they got rid of them, right?
Hold it right up, please.
Sort of lose everything from that. That's the whole purpose why we're here in the first place, is to serve others, right? So if you get rid of that and you shut everything down, then we've lost it. Plus, I also just want to mention the architecture of just this simple building. I don't have a lot of memories here. I just came here like a year ago. It has more to do with the fact that we get to sit in this place of worship and be a part of something that is making changes within this community. Let's just talk about the gardens, for instance. Just everything about this is what brings me peace as a new member, okay? So I don't ever want anyone to lose sight of those sorts of things when we talk about coming together in a much larger place or a gymnasium. Sorry, not disagreeing, just mentioning these things.
That's okay.
Architecture is sustainable. It does cost a lot, but there are people out there who are willing to take these old buildings and help us keep them alive and continue to worship this way. And just one other comment I want to make. It is true that I don't know for sure, but I don't know that my daughter, who lives in Staten Island right now, only had a job in teaching at the JCC because of a grant. People were sending their kids to organizations to go to school so they could get out. So I back up that, because that is a true reality. It is true. These grants were created just to get kids into school during COVID, so they had a place to learn, a formal place to learn. So I don't know if we're coming back. No one really knows, and who knows to believe all these numbers. But as we go through change, one of the things that brings us the most peace is being in a building like this. That's all I want to say, sorry.
You're fine, thank you.
You know, there's something to say about the environment creating a sense of worship, right? You know, and you know, that is important, right? You know, our physical beings, and, you know, a big part of our faith is the mystery of the incarnation, right? So God became one of us, and, you know, through the sacraments, he touches us in very physical ways, right? You know, so yes, the atmosphere of the building is important. But it's always a struggle, right? We're not about maintaining a museum. Talk about how do we create a lively church that goes out to do what we're called to do. And a building like this can often be inspiring for people to engage and get out there and do that.
Tom?
Go again. Years ago, when we were changing the Mass times, I stood up. They were all set to, you know, stop the early one and alter the later one and keep the central one that was the more popular service.
And Tom, excuse me, this is not the recent Mass time change. You're talking
long
further
time,
ago. Okay,
probably
just
20
want to
years
clarify.
ago, with people that I don't even see here anymore that
was
were
there.
on council and all. But I remember because I'd had a budget crisis at work, and my deputy and I decided that everyone's got to be affected by this. There can't be winners and losers, so everyone had to take a hit. If we were going to cut, we had to cut so that each person felt a little bit of it. So one wasn't like, oh, I survived this and you didn't, you're out. So I'm just recommending that whatever our future is, that everyone has to buy into it. No victor, no winner, no one church gets everything they want, and others are taking a big hit of loss here and there, that every one of us have to buy into the change, whether it's, of course, Mass times, but the physical and whatever else. Or they all have to be shown how improved something new, better could be for everyone. But just make sure that, and I'm sure you're sensitive to this, but I'm just bringing it up in front of a crowd here, that everyone has to kind of feel the pain and enjoy the pleasure of whatever happens to.
Right. Yeah, I agree, but I will put a more positive spin on it, and that whatever is decided and whatever happens, I hope we all look at it as we're all winning, because we will have a community and we will have the ability to worship and come together as a Catholic community, so we all win.
I mean, I think a part of it is that I'm trying to approach it to get everyone involved in the process, Tom. So whether they necessarily agree with the ultimate outcome, they feel like at least they were heard and their ideas were respected, and we looked at them and considered them, and that, you know, it wasn't just sort of like, oh, we're going to let this group win, and there's no opportunity for anyone to jump in and try to advocate for whatever position they have. But, you know, ultimately, unfortunately, you know, not everyone's going to be happy. But, you know, I'm trying to organize a process that at least gives people an opportunity to participate and engage and try to influence where we're going, so we can go there together. Yeah, yeah.
Yep. Anything else? So, just in closing, we really, as we've said, we want to hear from you. We want to hear from you. We want to hear your ideas. And in closing, I would say, keep thinking, stay engaged, ask questions, and thank you. One thing I neglected, I need to give Diane Cannell a huge shout out, because she put all the figures together in the binder and really was a key player in that facilities task force.